Hi everyone, and welcome to the Cambridge Union this evening. Tonight we are joined by the CEO of the British Heart Foundation. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Simon Gillespie.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I'll be introducing my colleague very shortly. It's a great opportunity and it's great to be back here in Cambridge. I'm joined by Johannes Berger, a BHF-funded researcher here at Cambridge, who will be talking to you a little bit about his work in a moment, so more from Johannes later. I had a glance at the other events that you're putting on this month, and I must say it's a rare honour to speak after some of the speakers and the debate participants that you've had, but before Wednesday's Zumba workshop. If any of you are here for the comedy night, I think that's tomorrow. As you've heard, I'm Simon Gillespie. I'm the Chief Executive of the British Heart Foundation. The first 23 years of my career were in the Royal Navy, including its times as Commanding Officer of HMS Sheffield and as a Government Ministerial Advisor. I spent time here at Cambridge at Corpus reading philosophy and political sciences, 78 to 81, and it was fascinating looking at the historical record of the photographs of the wall in the room just across the way. And I came back here in the early 90s to do an MPhil in international relations. After I left the Navy, I became Director of Operations at the Charity Commission, followed by a similar role at the Healthcare Commission, regulating healthcare in England and Wales. I then became Chief Executive of the Multiple Sclerosis Society, and I've been Chief Executive of the BHF for a little under 4 years now. Now, a number of you will be familiar with the work of the BHF, so in my comments today, I'd like to talk to you about our fight and why it's important today as it was when we were founded in 1961. And it's a fight, sadly, that has or will touch the lives of many people here in this room, amongst the 7 million people in the UK with cardiovascular disease. That's diseases of the heart and circulatory system. But first, I'd like to speak briefly about charities in general, their relationship with the public, and the issue of public trust and confidence. The last 5 to 6 years have seen a significant reduction in the measures of public trust and confidence in charities. A Charity Commission survey found recently that the level of trust had fallen from a score of 6.7 out of 10 in 2012 to 5.7 out of 10 in 2016. And some have called this decline unprecedented. Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. Declines in trust and confidence in charities have led historically to the introduction of charity legislation and regulation in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, including the Statute of Elizabeth, the founding piece of legislation for charity law in 1601, and the establishment of the Charity Commission itself in the mid-19th century, and the Register of Charities putting charities onto a formal and public basis in the 1960s. So is the charity sector in the UK in decline? And if so, is that decline terminal? And if it is terminal, will anyone mourn the charity sector's departure? Well, charity as a concept is a pretty ancient one. In the UK, the charity sector numbers 160,000 or so registered charities, including the Cambridge Union Society, and many more that do not have to register, including this university. Indeed, the size, scale, and scope of the charity sector and its constituent parts are often not fully appreciated. So of the 160,000 odd registered charities, most are small, with an income of less than £10,000 a year, and some are very large indeed. The Wellcome Trust, for example, has investments valued at approximately £14 billion. Some UK charities have activities and impact that are global or international. The aid, disaster relief and development sector includes Oxfam, Islamic Relief, UNICEF, Christian Aid, and many others that are relatively well known. Put together, the UK charity sector has a total income of just under £44 billion, employs over 800,000 people, and engages with tens of millions of people each year as donors, as volunteers, and of course, those who benefit from charities' activities. With such support from millions of people, how has the sector apparently managed to lose the trust and confidence of the British public? Well, my response is in 3 related areas. Firstly, the sector as a whole has not responded properly to long-standing and clear public concerns that there are too many charities. And whilst many of us trust and support individual charities, and sometimes quite an eclectic mix of charities, the interrelationships, collaboration, and often perceived competition between charities perplexes many people. By way of gross oversimplification, people think that we do good work, but they aren't convinced that we are good at the work we do in delivering value for money. Secondly, some of the activities of some charities at some times have concerned some people and damaged the reputation of the sector as a whole. The example of the very charitable and committed poppy seller, Olive Cook, whilst manifestly misrepresented in the media, did show that some activities of some charities were hectoring, poorly controlled, and wasteful. Charities, of course, should obey the law, but we're coming under increasing media and political scrutiny. So what is important is where we go from here. A charity does not have core tangible products to sell to customers who will benefit from it. It has a concept, an emotional connection, that giving money, time, and or support will benefit other people. It is a myth that charities will thrive without having to ask people for money. The issue for the sector is how we ask for support, and a better realization of the impact charity fundraising has on the public to rebuild connection and trust. And thirdly, the model of governance of charities is outdated, inflexible, and for some charities reaching breaking point. For many smaller, locally focused charities, the current model of volunteer trustees is adequate. But high-profile catastrophic failures, such as that of Kids Company, are thankfully rare, but mean that we need to look very closely at the model of governance that separates trustees and employees. It is time now for a thoroughgoing review of charity governance led by the sector itself, and challenging the notion that 17th century organizational and governance models are relevant to the 21st century. I'd like now to move on and talk about medical research and the charity sector. I'll speak mainly about the BHF's activities, and Johannes will speak about a little bit more about the work that we fund, although of course other medical research charities are available, and we're proud to work alongside them. Together, medical research charities fund about £1.3 billion worth of medical research in the UK. Looking at the BHF in particular, there are about 7 million people in the UK with cardiovascular disease. And the total of human misery and the emotional and financial costs of cardiovascular disease and the cost to society and the economy is enormous. In the decade I was born, in the 1950s, just over half of the deaths in the UK were attributable to cardiovascular diseases. An epidemic of diseases, the most common being heart attack and stroke. And at that time, little was known about the cause, treatment, or care. And a group of doctors decided to set up what was they termed initially the Heart Fund, which very quickly became the British Heart Foundation. It was a bold vision. The BHF's challenge was to do something about deaths people thought at the time were inevitable, and to do so through medical research. And today we invest just over £100 million a year in over 1,000 projects, funding through the spectrum from basic science through to translational medicine and clinical studies. Thanks to the generous support of the public, we are the biggest independent funder of heart and circulatory disease research in UK universities, funding over 50% of the research in UK universities. And the strides that have been made since 1961 have been quite extraordinary. Before the 1970s, heart attacks were poorly understood. Thanks to a groundbreaking study led by Professor Michael Davis, we learnt that heart attacks were caused by a blood clot in the coronary arteries. His work paved the way for the use of aspirin and the development and introduction of clot-busting drugs. We helped show the world their life-saving potential by supporting the pioneering Clinical Trials Services Unit at Oxford, setting the stage for their widespread use across the globe. In the 1980s, scientists had established that high cholesterol increased a person's risk of a heart attack, but there was still some confusion as to whether a cholesterol-lowering drug could help prevent a heart attack. In a 1989 trial in Scotland, led by a BHF professor, this was the first to give statins to large numbers of people and showed that statin treatment was a safe way of lowering cholesterol and preventing heart disease in a high-risk group. In the mid-1990s, the heart protection study led by BHF professor Sir Rory Collins showed that giving statins to people with normal cholesterol levels but who were at high risk reduced their risk of heart attack or stroke. And statins are now the most commonly prescribed drug given to those at risk of developing heart disease and are estimated to save over 7,000 lives in the UK alone each year. Since BHF was founded in 1961, it's driven a number of other improvements that have halved the number of people dying from heart and circulatory disease in the UK. But still, about a quarter of all deaths in the UK are directly attributable to cardiovascular disease. Each year in the UK, about 175,000 people have a heart attack. On the 17th of March 1979, when I was in my first year here at Cambridge, my father died, having had a heart attack just outside our home in Nottingham. He was the other side to the story that 3 out of 10 people then survived a heart attack. But thanks to modern treatments built on BHF-funded discovery, now around 7 out of 10 in the UK will survive. That equates to an additional 200 lives saved each and every day. Only a few decades ago, 8 out of 10 babies born with a congenital heart defect didn't survive to see their first birthday. Today, 8 out of 10 babies born with a congenital heart condition survive until adulthood. We should all be proud of the progress made, but of course the job isn't yet finished. Today, cardiovascular disease will kill 1 person every 3 minutes in the UK. 190 people will still die from a heart attack today, and 7 million people, as I've said, will fight their daily battle with heart and circulatory disease. Coronary heart disease, which is still the most common cardiovascular condition, is still the single biggest killer in the UK. And many people are surprised to hear that despite its association with older, inactive men, it kills more than twice as many women as breast cancer in the UK. So our mission is as important today as it ever was. Some of you might have seen today the launch of the Resuscitation to Recovery report, a framework to improve on our dismal survival rates from out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. The BHF was instrumental in developing this framework as part of its Nation of Lifesavers campaign, an element of our prevention, survival and support work. With the generous support of our volunteers and our donors, the BHF are committed to fund £1 million of life-saving research, £100 million of life-saving research every year until 2020. This £100 million funds over 1,000 critical research projects seeking to make breakthroughs across all aspects of heart and circulatory disease. We support 6 centres of research excellence, including one here in Cambridge, 3 centres of regenerative medicine, including one here that's shared between here and Oxford, across the UK, providing vital infrastructure for our world-class researchers. In 2016 alone, BHF-funded discovery included 2 new genes which are associated with a person's risk of coronary heart disease, which could lead to new treatments to prevent potentially fatal or disabling heart attacks. A new genetic test has been developed to improve detection of inherited heart conditions and avoid the sudden devastation such conditions cause through premature death and disability. About 620,000 people in the UK have such conditions. At present, most are undetected until a cardiac arrest, which will tragically often be fatal. And finally, as an example of our activities in 2016, a patch to bypass scars that have been caused by a heart attack, thus seeking to reduce the impact of the damage caused by the heart attack, enabling more people to resume active life. Now, to give you a glimpse of what this investment in research means in practice, I've asked Johannes Berger, a BHF-funded PhD scholar in Sanjay Sinha's lab here at the Wellcome Trust MRC Cambridge Stem Cell Institute, to talk to you about his work. His research focuses on cardiac repair using human stem cells, as is only part of the nearly £51 million of active grants we currently have here at Cambridge University. Johannes.
So, good evening, everyone. I want to start off by thanking the BHF and Simon Gillespie for the very kind invitation to give me the opportunity to talk here tonight. I think, leading on from what has been said, it's just very inspiring and encouraging to see how much dedication, time and effort that the BHF actually puts into generating an infrastructure, and at the same time to provide scientists like me with the resources to conduct the science every day that we really appreciate and that we like doing. So thank you very much for that. I'm just here tonight to share my hopefully humble view and perspective as a young clinician scientist. So I came to Cambridge about 5 years ago, and I had a very keen interest on cardiac repair and human stem cells. And I think I was fascinated by the idea that we can use human stem cells to generate literally all tissues of the human body. So nowadays we can generate neurons that make up the brain, blood vessel cells, heart cells, cells that comprise the kidneys or the liver. And I think that that is a very fascinating tool that we have got there. And the real idea of regenerative medicine is that we use these cells, that we use human stem cells to generate body tissues and then really replace those tissues that went missing or were damaged in disease or after an accident. And so 5 years ago, that was when I came to Cambridge. That was, as many of you will remember actually, when Professor John Gurdon, who works at the Gurdon Institute here in Cambridge, received the Nobel Prize jointly with Professor Shinya Yamanaka from Japan for the discovery that adult cells can be reprogrammed to human stem cells. And that opened up many new avenues in the field of regenerative medicine. And I think made it a very, very exciting field to study. And in this very aspiring atmosphere, I met the right person here in Cambridge, and it was Dr. Sanjay Sinha that Simon Gillespie has talked about. I started on to do my master's and my PhD with Dr. Sinha, and I started to work on human stem cells for cardiac repair. And all throughout my PhD studies, I've really been funded by the BHF. So the relevance of cardiac repair is really the following, and Simon has touched on that a little bit before. Cardiovascular disease, and in particular coronary artery disease, is still the #1 cause of death worldwide. So if you look at recent figures from the World Health Organization that have just been published in January, there are 7 million people. More than 7 million people that die every year because of coronary artery disease. In the UK alone, that is 70,000 people, and the BHF continues to monitor these numbers very closely. It's 190 patients every day that die because of coronary artery disease. So these are just absolutely horrifying numbers, despite the progress that modern medicine has made. And over the past 3 years, we've done a very exciting collaboration with one of the world-leading labs in Seattle, that is Dr. Charles Murray's group. And before I go into detail about that, I should talk a little bit about coronary artery disease and what really happens in that disease. So you've got a build-up of fatty material in the blood vessel that supply the heart itself with oxygen-rich blood. And if a part of this fatty material breaks away, it causes a blood clot. And that totally blocks off the blood flow to the working heart muscle that actually contracts and keeps the blood flowing throughout the body. So there is only one option that the heart muscle has got. If it doesn't receive the oxygen anymore, it dies off. And it is consequently replaced by a stiff scar that has lost the ability to contract and to pump blood. And this event is known as a heart attack. It's a life-changing event for patients. And as you can imagine, many of these patients then further deteriorate in their cardiac function. So on the mid to long term, that doesn't actually stop at this point. They further get hearts that deteriorate in their function, and they will develop heart failure. That means that their hearts are too weak to pump the blood throughout the body. And that is a very debilitating condition for patients. So just like to walk down the street, to go to a shop or to get changed in the morning, this is a huge challenge for patients. And there is really only one therapeutic option to date that can compensate for the key problem here, which is the loss of heart muscle cells after the heart attack, and that is heart transplantation. So as you can imagine, heart transplantation is the last resort. That is a very drastic undertaking on the one hand, but it is particularly complicated by two main problems. For one, there is a huge shortage of donor organs. So there are by far more patients that actually have got heart failure than there would be available organs. For those patients that are lucky enough to get a heart transplant, there is actually a high risk that this organ will be rejected. and then they are not left with any other option. So regenerative medicine is a very novel, very exciting new field and a new therapeutic option for these patients that is emerging here. So the holy grail, I want to say, of regenerative medicine and of cardiac repair really is to generate human stem cell-derived heart muscle cells and then transplant these back into the stiff scar of the heart and give the heart back the contractile function that it has lost after a heart attack, so that it is able to pump the blood through the body again and get the states that we had before the heart attack in the healthy heart. So this is really what we have been trying to do over the past 4 years. And we have collaborated, and I briefly talked about that before, with a lab in Seattle with Dr. Charles Murray's group that is a world-leading lab in cardiac repair. That was a hugely exciting collaboration for which we have been generously supported by the BHF. So I myself went over to Seattle twice during my PhD. For one, to bring some of the technology that we had developed here in Cambridge in the Stem Cell Institute over to Dr. Murray's lab. And then on the other hand, to bring back some of the key technology with regarding to human stem cell-derived cardiac repair back to Cambridge. So some of the work that we have been doing here in the Stem Cell Institute is to create so-called small 3D engineered heart tissues. So these are amazing small heart muscle patches that are about 4 by 1 millimeter, and they start contracting in a dish. So you can literally see the contractions that they make. They produce force, they handle calcium, they exhibit a lot of the characteristics actually that we would expect human heart muscle to exhibit. And what we have done with these tissues really is we wanted to better understand how the heart muscle develops, because the hypothesis is if we can better understand how organs develop in the human body, particularly here in the case of the heart, we can better regenerate it. So what we have been doing with Dr. Murray in Seattle is we have used human stem cell-derived heart muscle cells, so-called cardiomyocytes, and directly transplanted them into the scar by directly injecting them into the area where the heart muscle cells went missing. And thereby we want to give the heart back its contractile function. So in Dr. Murray's hands, who has been doing this research over the past 3 decades really, this has worked very well for rodents and for non-human primates, moving this very close actually to a clinical application. However, with that research, as promising as it is, there are certain limitations. And some of these limitations, for example, are that a lot of the cells, once we transplant them into the scar, they die off. They don't survive very well. They don't integrate very well. And what we have done here in Cambridge is that we developed small heart muscle patches that contract stronger, that are better developed, and that once we transplant them into the heart, they integrate better and they survive better. So in collaboration really with Dr. Murray, we tried to make a technology that works very well already and that seems to be very promising for cardiac repair even better and take that one step further. And if you think now that this is far off from any clinical application, it actually is not. So the group in Seattle is really gearing up to do the first in-human clinical trial using human stem cell-derived heart muscle cells for transplantation in patients with heart failure after a heart attack. And they will start enrolling the first patients in 4 years' time. So that is very exciting. And I really want to say then that this entire process of conducting this very exciting project was made possible through the BHF, which funds most of our research in the UK, and we could not be more grateful actually for that. But seeing or coming to the end of this process and seeing the results that come out of it, it was really, I think, an investment that was worthwhile making. And one thing that I want to mention, I think that is really important, that the BHF, it's one of the things that it really excels in, and that is public engagement. I think in the past there has been quite a disconnect between research that happens in laboratories all across the country and the understanding of the research by the general public. And I think we can be very, very fortunate to live in a country where we have got this fantastic culture of public engagement. And I think that the BHF bridges both of these ends very efficiently and very effectively and elegantly. And not only does educating the general public about cardiovascular disease save many lives in itself every year, it also makes a big difference to the scientists who normally, they are not used to having the pleasure to talk to a general audience or the general public about the research that they do. And in that regard, we had a commercial video taken in the Sinner Lab here in Cambridge a couple of years ago, which was just a fantastic opportunity for everyone involved to talk about the research, how really good science is being done, what the ingredients are that we use to make good experiments, and to talk about our drive and our motivations. And that was just a great opportunity. And then in the end, to close off, I just want to say that I think there are many things that we share with people that work for charities like the BHF, but one thing, I guess, that is a unifying scheme there is that we want to make a difference for patients, really, that suffer from cardiovascular disease. Yeah, and with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions and also head back to Simon. Thank you.
Should we hold questions till the end, if that's okay? I've just got a
Sure.
few more comments, but anyone will think we coordinated this because I want to pick up on Johanna's theme about public perceptions and public engagement. One of the issues that we as an organisation feel that we need to put across to the public is actually the fight against cardiovascular disease isn't yet won. And we know that overall, many of our fellow countrymen and women have a perception that cardiovascular disease is all down to your lifestyle choices and nothing else. And actually the true story is that there's a very complex interrelationship between your choice of parents, i.e. your genetic history, the environment around you. You will have seen more publicity during the course of today about the impact of air pollution on your health, including on your cardiovascular health. And also then, of course, the choices you make as an individual about your lifestyle, whether you undertake physical activity, your diet, and whether you smoke or not, for example. And it's for this reason we're trying to communicate some of the sudden devastation of cardiovascular disease. It is unusual in many respects that you can actually say goodbye to somebody in the morning and not have the opportunity to say goodbye to them properly because actually they've died during the course of today. And most important for us, of course, is to show that properly conducted medical research is the answer to these problems. Now, as if by magic, I'll ask the video to be played, please.
Sister's big day, finally. Me, maid of honour, obviously. Everybody's here. Mum, Dad. It's a shame I'm going to miss it. Sorry I ruined your big day, sis.
We don't seek to upset. We create communications like this with real people's stories in minds, with the hope that it'll help us to fund research that will stop more people dying from these deadly heart conditions. So I'd ask that you speak to your friends and family about the sort of issues that I've brought up and what will come up during the questions and answer session. And if you'd like to get involved with the BHF, then we'd love to have you with us. There are all sorts of things you can get involved with. Runners might like something like our Tower of London run coming up in mid-May. Cyclists might prefer our annual London to Brighton bike ride. And you can find out more about these events and many others on the website. You can donate unwanted stuff at our shops, and there are a number of shops here in Cambridge, and of course buy great bargains, and join over 20,000 volunteers supporting the fight for every heartbeat. But looking ahead, I think we have a number of challenges. Some of these, of course, are shared with other charities, and some are maybe specific to us and our field of endeavour. In terms of some of the common ones, I think there is going to be a need to balance the demands of new and emerging needs, and we're seeing some of those coming through at the moment with the resources available. We will need to get more for less in many, many different ways. I've mentioned moving governance to be more modern adaptive, transparent, and responsive. Overall, we need to focus much more on the impact of our work as the charitable sector rather than the activities which seem good. We need to make a difference and be seen to be doing so. We need to understand more fully and capitalize on the digital transformation which is going on and in many cases already started and is well underway in many other areas of life. And also growing personalization. The fact is that we are all individuals, and we need to relate to people, whether they are donors, supporters, members of the public, heart patients, as if they are individual people rather than stereotypes. Now, for the BHF, this has got huge implications for the research we fund, the services we provide, and how we attract and retain supporters, donors, and volunteers. There are also some significant demographic and macroeconomic changes going through at the moment. There is a concern that younger people may feel that they can give less, and that older people may feel that they need to support the younger generations who are suffering from lower standards of living. And for the BHF in particular, as a world-leading medical research charity, new technologies and techniques highlight challenges and huge opportunities. Genomics, big data, informatics, personalization, digital all show the potential to transform our perspectives and knowledge. As Johannes has touched on, actually, the boundaries between traditional disciplines and between institutions are being eroded, and many fragments of reference are shifting. We, like many other charities, need to work hard to show our supporters' generosity grows knowledge, but also ensure that the translation of this knowledge into human benefit is conducted effectively and expeditiously. So thank you all very much indeed for listening. I said we'd have questions and answers at the end, and I think I'm supposed to be choreographing this session because there's only 2 chairs up here. So please, the floor is yours, and Johannes and I will do our best to answer. Thank you. Please.
You said at the beginning, well, you've diagnosed some of the issues facing the charity sector in general at the start of your talk. I was wondering what you think should be, so in terms of like the disillusionment, in terms of, I think you said it's dropped from 6.7 out of 10 to 5 point something.
Yeah.
What are the sort of 3 main things do you think that can be done to change that and improve the perception of charities by the general public?
Yeah, I don't want to sound too much like Tony Blair on this. It comes down, I think, to openness. Openness in terms of opening the book much more readily on what charities do. Because in many areas, there's a perception that charities are, if you like, totally run by volunteers, and they have to be local, and that, right. And my important point is that you have to have the right-sized organisation for the problem that you're trying to deal with. And for dealing with problems in a local community or issues in a local community, then a locally based organisation is best placed to do that. But I think we have a huge task to show that the big national organisations, of which BHF is one, really make a difference to people's lives on a day-to-day basis as well. So that's firstly, I think, about that openness. The second openness bit is about our reporting of activities has got to be far clearer. For the sort of governance geeks, if you like, there is a thing called the Statement of Recommended Practice in terms of audits, the SORP, for charities, which is pretty arcane and designed around a one-size-fits-all approach, which doesn't get to the key issues that people really want to know. It's great if you want to look through sort of reams of figures at the back of the annual report in the accounts section, but it doesn't really tell you what difference has been made. And I think that's fundamentally important as well. And the second of it is how you get the public and in particular involved, and your supporters involved in the activities of a charity. That doesn't necessarily mean that each of the 64 million people in the UK has to be giving money to the BHF. I'd welcome that if they all did. But what it does mean to say is that people have to have an understanding, it's very baseline, of the benefits that they are getting and they're accruing from that. So let me give you one example, which is if somebody was unfortunate to have a heart attack in Cambridge today, and statistically, at least one person will do, when they go down the road to Addenbrooke's and into A&E, what they will see is treatment under the NHS. What they don't see behind that is the huge expanse of research work that has gone on, largely funded by the BHF, which has gone through causes, diagnosis and diagnostic techniques, and into treatment and care. So things like specialist cardiac units, for example, were unheard of before the BHF started working to try and introduce us and harnessing and using its convening power, if you like, to bring the specialists and others together to do it. So I think those three areas of openness are really important for us.
You were just talking a bit about the NHS. How dependent would you say is the NHS on charities like the British Heart Foundation?
I would say hugely. I'll give one BHF example and then a more generic one, if I may do. The BHF example is that we are the largest provider of information materials to NHS patients about cardiovascular conditions. If you go to just about any cardiac outpatients department in the UK, you will find British Heart Foundation publications there almost totally taking up the wall, and they're almost handed out as prescriptions, if you like, and then obviously links through to YouTube channels and all the rest of it that we have available. So many of those 7 million people, and the people that care for them, will be reliant on that type of information coming from the BHF. And we have networks of professionals to make sure that we can help keep people up to date and provide support networks and the like through the BHF Alliance. I think in the general terms, if you look at our absolutely dominant position in funding cardiovascular disease research, a lot of the improvements, the technologies, the better care and the better outcomes wouldn't have been achieved without us. We're funding more than half of the cardiovascular disease research in the UK. So that is a huge contribution. And the BHF isn't the icing on the cake in this respect. It isn't the nice to have, it's actually the need to have. And that's quite different from the situation in cancer funding, for example, where although Cancer Research UK and our colleagues there are funding more than 3 times as much research as we are, the government's actually putting in a lot more on top of that as well. But even so, the work it's a unique factor, I think, of British society, is that you've got a really active medical research charity part of the charity sector, £1.3 billion or so, gathered from people from all walks of life right across the UK, supporting the idea that you can make things better through research. And I think that's really fundamentally important. Mm. I'll go to the back there, if I may, and then into the middle. So, and you've got to ask a really difficult question to Johannes.
It remains the case that if you have a cardiac arrest outside of a hospital environment without rapid access to a defibrillator, your chances of survival are very, very low. Do you think it should be a legal requirement that large institutions like hotels should have a defib on their premises?
Yeah, just to put the figures on that, if there are about 30,000 or so out-of-hospital cardiac arrests each year, in England, and pretty common across the rest of the UK as well, your chances of survival of an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest are about 8%. In other areas of the world, they're 25% or better. And that's because they have a much clearer idea of the chain of survival, which goes from early raising of the alarm, in our case dialing 999, shouting for help, all of those sorts of things, early bystander CPR, so doing chest compressions and then the rescue breaths if you feel able to do that, and then rapid access to defibrillation, which is the shock that will hopefully restore a regular heartbeat, and then rapid transportation in, with, if you like, the experts after that point. Everything, the first 3 steps of the chain of survival have nothing to do with clinicians. You might be lucky, you might find you have a paramedic walking past at the time that somebody has a cardiac arrest, but normally it's down to you and me. And it's really important that we understand how to implement that chain of survival, and that was the report that was launched. We would entirely support having public access defibrillators available in as many places as possible. The public bit is really important to us. There is no point having them locked up behind closed doors, only available Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. That's great for the people that happen to work in that environment, but it's not so great for everybody else. If you do nothing with a patient, their chances of survival drop by about 10% a minute. You're doing nothing. So yes, the earlier you can get some defibrillation in there to try and get the heart beating regularly again, rather than you trying to do it for them, the better. So the answer to your question is pretty much a yes. We'd like legislation, I think, to bring in much more public access defibrillators around the country. But we also need to make sure that we know where they are. One of the issues that we're trying to confront at the minute, and it will be quite a significant one for us, is to make sure that each of the ambulance trusts across the UK actually have a clear record of where the public access defibrillators are, so that actually if you do have a cardiac arrest, you dial 999, the emergency operator can tell you there's a defib just around the corner. Go that way and turn left and you'll find it. And at the moment, we have nowhere close to any idea of where defibs have been put. We know where the ones we've funded or part funded are, but we don't know where everybody else's are. Okay, thank you. And down to the middle here, so you? So I'm sorry to be unfriendly and point. It's sort of, yeah.
Sorry?
That's right.
Oh, okay.
I was apologizing just pointing and saying you, so that's right.
It's okay. I had a couple of questions. I guess one is whether there are equivalents of your foundation in other countries, like other developed countries, or whether this is a fairly unique structure. Because I haven't heard of before, I'm from the Czech Republic, of like a charity basically funding research. And then secondly, what percentage of the funding you have goes to research versus patient services? Because you mentioned that you do sort of lobby for legislation as well as provide direct patient services. Yeah. So sort of what's the breakdown? And thirdly, do you only work in the UK, or are you also looking out specifically maybe to the developing countries where the needs are much, much higher even than they are in our countries? Thank you.
I love three questions at once. I hope I remember them all. So the first one is, are there other organizations internationally funding cardiovascular disease research? The answer to that is yes. The American Heart Association, which is actually a far bigger organization than us, but the balance of their investment, their expenditure is different to ours. They're probably funding about 80 to 90 million pounds worth equivalent. Obviously, it depends on how you judge the exchange rate at the moment, which doesn't seem to be that favourable for one reason or other. So they're funding a lot of research in the States, but the National Institute for Health Research in NIH is funding a lot as well in the States, and that's a US government-funded institution. In Europe, and I'm the president of the European Heart Network, there are probably about another 3 or 4 organizations who are funding research to any significant degree. So our colleagues in the Dutch Heart Foundation, Swedish Heart and Lung Foundation, the German Heart Foundation, and I'm just running out a little bit there actually. So those are probably the main ones. The European Heart Network is open to membership from anyone in the UN's definition of Europe, but don't need to be an EU member, thankfully, but nevertheless important for us. So I don't think we've got a member organisation in the Czech Republic at the moment. We have one in Slovakia, so maybe it's a little bit of pressure on there to in Slovakia. I should know their names. I know the names of the individuals concerned with it, but I'll come back to that maybe with you later on. So the third bit was actually, do we look outside the UK as well? And the answer to that is yes, we do. But there is I think an understanding that what we are doing, although our charitable objects allow us to look at all medical conditions anywhere in the world, that sometimes the clue's in the name British Heart Foundation, so it's a UK focus around cardiovascular disease. But as Johannes indicated, research is an international, if not global, endeavour. So we do collaborative funding with a number of organisations. We are looking as part of our new research strategy to how we can do more international collaboration, and also alongside that more international fundraising as well. We are the largest non-profit funder of cardiovascular disease research in the world. So that gives us quite an impact and quite an influence that I think we need to be exploring much more over the next 2 to 3 years or so. And your second question, which I've now taken last, is about the balance of investment, how much we spend on things. So our commitment is to £100 million at least into research each year. We spend about £21 million in terms of that prevention, survival and support activity. So it's about an 80-20 split. Okay, did I get all three? Yeah. Great, thank you. Please, in the middle there.
You mentioned that there's a sense that there's too much competitiveness with different charities. Do you find this justified, and does there need to be more cohesion between them all?
I think there needs to be a lot more collaboration between organisations. It does vary from particular bit of the charity sector to particular bit, and in many areas you can look at things like the Disasters Emergency Committee, which is that coordinating group for many of the relief and aid agencies, which has been really effective in bringing people together to make sure that we can get funds where they're needed in the world to deal with a crisis. In other areas, it's not as well, I won't use the word control, because I think it is a civil society. It's not about that type of control, but nowhere near as well coordinated. And part of that goes back to what I was talking about those models of governance, where the emphasis of a trustee of a charity is about effectively focused on the well-being of that organisation, rather than how you can get the maximum benefit for those people you're set up to help and support. And sometimes getting that maximum benefit is by saying, look, there's a limit to what we can do. Let's take the resources we've got and give it to another organisation so they can do it. Sometimes it's about having the vision to bring organisations together. There's one great example that I particularly know about, because when I was at the Charity Commission, it was going through for legal approval. But that's putting together the Cancer Research Campaign and the Imperial Cancer Research Fund to form Cancer Research UK. And people were concerned that putting those two big organisations together would somehow reduce the amount of money that they would have available to spend. Actually, it's been the reverse. Cancer Research UK has grown enormously as a result and doing really great stuff. So I think we need to focus much more on that type of model, which can bring two very successful organisations together to build something that's really new and special. Please. Oh, sorry. Wait. You're next then. Sorry.
I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but I was wondering how you split funding, and if you're going to change how much you split funding between preventative, like diagnostic and treatment services. You've talked a lot about sort of the treatment aspect to it, but do you focus on a specific aspect? Is that going to change?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we are largely a response mode funder, so what that means is that researchers come to us and say, I've got this great project which is relevant to cardiovascular disease. And we don't say we will put 10% into prevention, we will put 20% into this, we'll put 20% into that, or whatever. We don't say that. However, what I think we will do, and we have done in terms of our Centre of Research Excellence, but also the Regenerative Medicine Centres, where we want to focus attention onto unmet need. And the latest research strategy is very clear about what some of those are. So cardiac surgery techniques moved on immensely about 20, 30 years ago. So some of the improvements in survival rates for babies born with congenital heart disease are down to the fact that pediatric cardiac surgery had huge improvements, and many of the techniques that were developed 20 or 30 years ago are still in use now. But there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of surgical techniques to build on that and make the next step change. So that's one area. There are other areas, I think, around how we build better international collaborations and how we explore the possibilities, for example, of big data. We are in a relatively, if you can ever be relatively unique, we're, I think, probably fairly close to being unique in the UK with the NHS, how we use the information and data that's available there much more effectively and deal with people's understandable concerns about data privacy, but also use health records appropriately to generate the sorts of incomes of the sorts of issues that we don't almost yet recognize. So there's some big steps forward there where we're trying to target some of that much more around some of big data and informatics and how we can use machine learning, for example. There was a study published probably about 4 weeks or so ago about diagnostic accuracy of a smartphone camera on a skin lesion compared to diagnostic accuracy of a clinician. And actually the machines were as accurate as the clinicians. So it was reported in the study. So how can we use those types of techniques as well? So we're looking to move forward very significantly into the next agenda, and we'll probably see much more of us saying we're interested in particular areas of activity or particular outcomes of people. Now come to us and tell us how you're going to do it. we've already made some progress in that. In fact, one of the examples I would use would be a traditional approach would say for somebody with heart valve disease, we need something about heart valve disease, and we will go to people that specialise in doing this before. It's a great piece of work actually is being done here in Cambridge by a chemical engineer about a new material for use in heart valves and working it through. People, I made the comment about disciplinary boundaries are collapsing around us. I think that's a really good example of it. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future.
I think we have time for one last question.
One more, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
This has got to be a deeply technical question for Johannes, because he's been very
Yes,
quiet.
it's regarding the Stem Cell Institute. Do you work collaboratively with other institutions or
You mean
institutes around the world?
internationally or in
Yes,
Cambridge?
no, internationally. For
Yeah,
your
I would have
research.
said both actually. So here, absolutely, and internationally as well. Yes, for certain key projects, definitely. Yeah.
And is it important for the quality of your research?
Yeah, that's a very insightful and important and relevant question, I guess. So for what we have been trying to do, I guess, for our project, there was really a very highly specialized intervention that we are trying to do here. And no one in Cambridge, you wouldn't believe that maybe, but has grown human stem cell-derived heart muscle cells, so-called cardiomyocytes, even though that maybe globally that's quite a common tool that has been developed. But so for that, actually, we had to reach out and look at other labs that do that worldwide. And there was this connection already established with Dr. Murray, who did his sabbatical in Cambridge at the Stem Cell Institute as well. So we were familiar with his work. And I mean, he has made a large footprint, really, in regenerative medicine, I would say, over the past 3 decades, which is why it's so close to clinical application now. Yeah, but it's very important, actually, that we reach out and work more with other people at other nations as well, yeah.
And from our perspective as the funder, if you like, in this, we see ourselves as a world-class funder. And that's what we aspire to. So we're looking to people to make sure that we're funding the best possible research that is globally competitive. And for example, when we've got about 34 fully funded professors, when they are reviewed, a site visit, that will be internationally peer-reviewed by global experts to make sure that the research we're funding is globally competitive. And that applies to people we're funding for their PhDs as well. We're looking for the very, very best.
Well, thank you both so much for coming to speak to us tonight. And can you all join me in giving a warm thanks to Simon and
Johannes.
Johannes.